Pen Made Mightier without roids.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Pen Made Mightier. Gideon Ray here. We're going to be talking about Over the Garden Wall today. It's a mini-series made by Patrick McHale. It features the voice talent of Christopher Lloyd and stars Elijah Wood of all people. It's fantastic, and you don't really get to see it much because it was only aired the one time that I'm aware of, and has only just recently been announced for a DVD release, despite the fact that it's been more than a year since the series' conception and airing. But it has beautiful art design, fantastic characters, some really great music, and honestly, I think it's one of the best animated things I've seen in years. I honestly think that despite the fact that Tumblr loves it, and that I see it all over social media, there's just not enough people that know about this wonderful piece of animation. In addition to its quirky charm, cute characters, great subject matter, and elegantly told story, there's also that hint of darkness that really always draws me in, and there's lots of parallels that can be drawn between Over the Garden Wall and, most popularly, Dante's Inferno. We're going to talk about that today, because illusion is really something that more media should use, and I feel like this is one of the best examples of something that did it well. However, I also have a bit of a dissenting opinion. I believe that Over the Garden Wall compares better to Paradiso, the sequel to Dante's Inferno. So we're going to talk about that next week. But for now, on to Dante's Inferno. The biggest concern I have with the Over the Garden Wall linking to Dante's Inferno theory is that the first episode doesn't really have an analog in the Dante's Inferno mythos. You pretty much have to start with Limbo, the first layer of hell, being the second episode, Hard Times at the Huskin Bee. Otherwise, it doesn't line up properly. And you can say that the first episode is the journey from the beginning of the story towards Limbo, and I think that makes sense. But it does mean that it doesn't line up perfectly congruently. So in case you haven't seen it, Over the Garden Wall follows two brothers, Wirt and Greg, as they venture through the woods lost, trying to find their way home. They're guided by a bluebird named Beatrice, again, cue the Dante's Inferno stuff, and in the first episode they meet a woodsman who is chopping down edelwood trees in order to produce a thick black oil to keep his lantern burning. This, again, doesn't really line up with anything from Dante's Inferno, other than, they meet their guide, who would be Virgil in this case, and they head towards Limbo. Second episode, Hard Time at the Huskin Bee, shows our trio of heroes making their way to a small town known as Pottsfield. Pottsfield would be Limbo. Pottsfield, of course, being short for Potter's Field, which were fields of unnamed graves, and yeah, that fits. So, Wirt and Greg intrude on this ceremony, and Enoch catches them. And because they have intruded and because they've trampled pumpkins, he sentences them to a small amount of manual labor, sends them out into the fields to dig some holes. At the bottom of these holes, skeletons. Skeletons put on vegetable costumes and join the congregation. So, more souls come to Limbo out of nowhere. They're even told at one point during their intrusion on the festival that nobody leaves Pottsfield. And when they decide to leave at the end, Enoch says, no matter, everyone comes here eventually. Which, ominous. Ugh, creepy. So, moving on to episode 3, which would be the second level of Dante's Inferno, reserved for those who have committed the sin of lust to a great extent. The only real analog here is that Mrs. Langtry's school is completely funded by her father, and she has a passion for this guy, Jimmy Brown, who has gone off Lord knows where, gallivanting around, I think they say. And he is in so much love with Miss Langtry that he becomes a beast. So you could say that this is a cartoon representation of lust, but it doesn't quite fit for me. It's kind of the best it can do, though. Still a fun episode, still very cute. Lots of fun in this one, but not my favorite episode of the series. So, third layer of hell, episode 4, Gluttony. This one is also kind of a weak spot for the theory. The only reason they associate it with Gluttony is that all of the characters in Tales of the Dark Lantern, I believe is the episode name, are all stuffed in an inn and eating, and Well, nothing really else fits the layer of hell associated with gluttons. This is part of why I have my problems with the theory. It can still make sense. I mean, they are just sitting around in an inn, scarfing down food. That could be seen as just gluttony. But they do so much more in this episode that I'm inclined to believe otherwise. So, the fourth layer of hell, episode number 5. This is the one where we meet Quincy Endicott in his magnificent mansion. And this is the layer of hell associated with greed, which fits perfectly. Endicott is massively rich, so rich that both he and the other lady in the story have built their mansions to the point that they have collided and neither of them noticed. They are living in one giant super mansion, accomplished by their ridiculous wealth. And it is in fact greed that the main characters deal with in this, in stealing a few coins for the ferry and being able to continue on their passage. This one fits the sin just about better than any other of the episodes of Over the Garden Wall. There's greed in Mr. Endicott, there's greed in Mrs. Gray, and their combined greed together blinds them to each other, to the point that they are unaware that the other one even exists. And the main characters deal with stealing a few coins for the ferry, and yeah, that's another representation of greed, so fits quite well. On to the fifth layer of hell. 6th episode of Over the Garden Wall deals with taking the ferry to Adelaide of the Pasture. This is also the layer of hell where Dante takes the ferry deeper into hell itself. The ferry, of course, in both stories requiring 2 coins for passage, and this is supposed to be the layer of hell associated with anger and sorrow. The only real anger in the episode is the frog police that chase them down, and the only real sorrow in the episode comes from Beatrice and Wirt's miscommunications, because Beatrice is starting to feel remorse for taking these kids to an almost certain bad fate at the hands of Adelaide. Other than that, it doesn't fit so well. The 6th layer of hell, the 7th episode of Over the Garden Wall, is called The Ringing of the Bell. The 6th layer of hell is reserved for heretics and witches, and the episode The Ringing of the Bell fits that perfectly. In this, a girl is possessed by a dark spirit and controlled by her witch-like godmother and kept to scrub floors and collect black turtles and arrange giant murals of bones in the basement. The bones, in fact, of all of her past victims. Fitting the heresy and witch theme quite well, and honestly being one of the scariest episodes of the whole damn show. 7th layer of hell, reserved for the violent. They couldn't really do violence in a kids show on Cartoon Network justice, so they decided to go full circle and do cartoonish style violence by having Greg and the denizens of the Cloud Kingdom do war with the Old North Wind. At least that's the argument. 8th layer of hell is reserved for the fraudulent. In this episode, Wirt pushes all of his problems off as not being caused by himself, but being caused by his brother Greg, which is a form of fraud. Beyond that, we learn through the backstory that, in fact, much of what we thought we knew about Wirt is fraudulent. He's wearing a Halloween costume instead of what we, I guess, assumed before were normal clothes. We learn that it is not in fact a medieval story, but one modern day and somehow transported to an alternate reality, a limbo-ish kind of wood. There's many things that you can construe as fraud in this episode, and honestly, this is the episode that threw me for the biggest loop. You also see the Beast lying to the woodsman some more. Definitely some fraud there. But man, wasn't it a trip to realize that Wirt and his brother were actually from, well, I suppose about 10, 15 years ago, somewhere around the 90s or the year 2000. I did not see that coming. Not even for a second did I think that Wirt and his brother were actually modern day kids dressed in weird clothes just for Halloween. Good job, guys. Okay, so that brings us to the final episode and the final layer of hell. The last level of hell is all about treachery, and as you know if you've seen the show, the final episode is all about the treachery of the Beast. The Beast who tries to get people to turn on each other, never directly harming anyone, but rather using deceit and ill tact to get people to do what he wants. He has people betray each other. He tries to get Wirt to betray Greg. He tries to get the woodsman to betray both children. Everything he can to get them to betray each other, which literally fuels his life force and keeps him burning. We learn that the Edelwood trees are actually people who have lost all hope and been transformed either by the beast or some other mystical force of the wood into trees that can be chopped and burned to keep his lantern alight. And yeah, that's treacherous. Absolutely treacherous. Horrifyingly treacherous. We need more bad guys like the Beast in modern media. People who can show that they're terrifying without having to be vicious or without having to hurt anybody directly, and showing that the real people you have to watch out for, it's not the guy with the axe, it's not the creepy old man in the woods with a lantern, it's that person who sticks to the shadows and speaks with a voice of soft silk. That about gets us through Dante's Inferno. There's a lot of good strength to that theory, and I think it really makes a lot of sense. There's a few places I feel like it could be done better. But honestly, this show is so nuanced and so well done that there's probably a lot of comparisons you can draw between it and tons of different kinds of media. As a small extra note, it is worthy to mention that many of the characters that you see in the show are confirmed to either be dead now or to have died and possibly even be resurrected, or perhaps from a comatose state. Main of note would be Quincy Endicott. We actually see his tombstone during the backstory episode. It's one of the tombstones that Greg and his brother hide behind, and yeah, it's something you notice on your second viewing or third or fourth. I don't know how many times I've watched Over the Garden Wall, but each time it just gets better. It's one of those kinds of shows. So if you're looking for a show to lots of people, a show that's fine to show to kids but great to watch with adults, and something that gets better with every single viewing, you gotta go watch Over the Garden Wall. Thank you for sticking with me on this video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe for more videos. Share it with your friends. And next week, we're going to talk about another facet of Over the Garden Wall where I show you my theory, comparing it not to Inferno, but to Paradiso. Again, I thank you for sticking with me, and I hope to see you again real soon.